Hello and welcome back to my channel. It is June. In fact, it's June 2nd, which means it's time to go over my May books. What did I read? Well, I read 10 books. I mean, technically I DNF'd one, but I'm going to count that as 10 books. So I want to go through all of them, tell you my thoughts, tell you my reviews, would I recommend them? Let's get into that. Many of the books that I read this month were those that were selected from the TBR Jar Picks My May Reads video. So if you want to go back and watch that, you can, so you can see how I got to here. So the first book that I read in May is The 12 Kingdoms by Dana Caldwell. Now, I've mentioned this before. This is a local author to me. She was exhibiting at a local artisan market near me, so I got to meet her and buy her book. She signed it for me. She is a debut author with this book, so I believe this is the first book in what will become a trilogy. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. I was really impressed with the amount of world building that was in this for such a young debut author. So basically, it follows the story of this girl, Rose. She is a half-elf. She is princess to her kingdom, but her parents were killed, and she's just been kind of hiding out to avoid being killed by the woman who has taken over her kingdom. She's decided she has given up trying to fight for her kingdom. She just wants to live a normal life in this little farm village that she's in. This elf guy shows up and he's hot and he's trying to convince her to take back her crown and take back the kingdom, save her people, because the woman who took over the kingdom is evil, of course. Rose doesn't really want to, but she's kind of forced along in the situation to go and do that task. There's a lot of found family throughout this. Some of her friends from the village that she's living in come to join them, and they just kind of go along on these journeys. There's really interesting magic that is involved. Rose is kind of experiencing an issue with her own personal magic, but she's just really kind of in denial about this. But some really interesting concepts. I think for me, the only issue that I had is that there was too much for one book. I feel like, considering that this is going to be a trilogy, some things could have been removed and maybe built upon in another book later on. I think that that's just really what was it for me. There definitely were a few moments that had me really surprised. There's something that happens with a character that I was not expecting. But yeah, overall, I really would recommend this book. I gave it 4 stars overall, and I'm really curious to see where this series goes. And as soon as the next book's published, I'll definitely be picking it up. So the next book that I read was How to Solve Your Own Murder. So I read this for book club. I thought it was a really interesting read. I don't really read a lot of murder mysteries. I've done some Agatha Christie's, and of course, she's the best, and no one can compare to this. This one was okay. I feel like the initial concept was really good. The beginning of the book was great as we're being introduced to these characters and what the murder we're trying to solve is going to be. But in my personal opinion, I did not enjoy the reveal at the end. I also didn't feel like we were brought along the journey as much as we should have been in the solving of this murder. It was very much still at a point that it could have been anyone when it was revealed who it was. And then it was followed by 10 pages of the main character explaining how she got there. And at no point throughout the book did I ever think that she could have actually have been able to solve it based on the information that we were given, which is to say why I would have liked to have gone along the journey with her a little bit more. I would probably give this book 3 stars. It was fine. It was something. There were some entertaining moments, certainly some moments that kept me on the edge of my seat or made me gasp that I wasn't expecting, but not a great book. The sequel for this book just came out, and I read the synopsis, and personally, I'm not interested in reading it. One of my friends did read it. She rated it 2 stars. I was like, hey, I'm not going to read it. Can you spoil it for me? And that's all I'm going to say. So for the next book that I read in May, the TBR jar prompt was a reread. So for that, I selected The Hobbit. I actually decided to go back and do this on audiobook, and I'm so glad that I did. I did the audiobook that is narrated by Andy Serkis, who is the voice of Gollum and Smeagol in the movies. Honestly, best choice ever. It was such a fun audiobook to listen to. He did incredible voices throughout it. And of course, when you get to the scene with Gollum, he does his Gollum voice. I think the first time I read this book was 10 years ago, and I did really enjoy it then, but it's been a long time, so there were a lot of details that I had forgotten within it, and it was just really great to hear it on the audiobook. Definitely enjoyed this. If you haven't read The Hobbit, where have you been? But if you want to read it, dude, The audiobook narrated by Andy Serkis, highly recommend. This book really truly still hits even after all this time, so it's an obvious 5-star read. The next book I read, its prompt was a book with a number in its title, and for that I had selected Six Crimson Cranes. I loved this book. I had a great time with it. This was so interesting. So it follows our main character, Shiori, who is the daughter of the emperor of this fantasy kingdom. She discovers accidentally that she has magical powers. They're pretty small powers, nothing extraordinary. But the problem is that magic is banned from her kingdom and she can be killed for the fact that she has magic. So she keeps it hidden away. She has a stepmother who she discovers is an evil sorceress. So the stepmother, in order to keep her quiet, turns Shiori's 6 brothers into cranes and then tells Shiori that if she speaks a single word, she will kill one of her brothers. And then she sends them off into the world, and Shiori has to try and navigate the world without a voice, otherwise she'll kill one of her brothers and try and find her way back home. Like I said, I really enjoyed this. I really liked this character. She was really stubborn, but really smart and really resourceful in how she was trying to survive. She went from being, a spoiled little princess to a little kitchen girl just trying to get by without speaking at all. She was really clever in how she got through things. She has a little sidekick, which is a paper crane who can communicate with her telepathically, and she was just really cute, and I just liked her a lot. There was a little plot twist at the end that I really enjoyed. So overall, this was a fun book, and I already picked up the sequel because I'm really curious to find out where this goes. So this is part 1 of a duology. And in the end, I gave it 4.5 stars. I only knocked off half a star because in the middle of the book, it did get a little slow, and I was kind of like, all right, let's move it along here. But that was really the only issue that I had with the book. The next book that I read in May was The Night and the Moth. This right here was my most highly anticipated book of all of 2025, and it did not disappoint. I picked it up from Barnes & Noble on release day and got started with it just right away. Really fascinated by it. Honestly, I'm sure you've already been hearing about it, so I don't really need to go too deep into this, but basically our main character, her name is Six. She only goes by the number 6. We later learn what her real name is, but she is what's called a diviner. She reads the omens of people who come to visit her by effectively drowning. And in the time that she's drowning, she has these dream sequences that tell people whether they have good fortune upcoming or bad. Her and her 5 other diviners are very close. They are sort of in this like almost indentured servitude in which they have to provide 10 years of life to the abbey in which they are in service to, and then they're set free. But with 2 months to go before their time is up, all 5 of the other diviners mysteriously disappear one night after another. So she leaves alongside of a king and a couple of other knights to try and find them. There is a side character that is a gargoyle. He is the comic relief and I love him so much, but did that gargoyle drop some of the most profound wisdom I've ever read? Yes. Highly recommend this book. 5 stars. I knew it was going to be 5 stars going in. I came out of it knowing it was 5 stars. Rachel Gillig can do no wrong. I anxiously await the sequel to this duology. So back to TBR jar books that I selected for the month. Next up, I had Gallant. So the prompt for this one was a 1-word title. I do love me some V.E. Schwab. However, I did mention in my 12-hour readathon video that sometimes her books are amazing and sometimes her books are just kind of mid. So unfortunately, this fell into the mid zone, even though it has a really interesting premise. So it follows the story of a girl named Olivia who is mute. She cannot speak. She is an orphan being raised in a school for girls that sort of trains them into be either good wives or good housemaids or good ladies' maids, things like that. She gets a letter from her family saying, hey, we've been looking for you. We want you to come live with us. So she goes to that house. The house is called Gallant. And basically, there's just a whole lot of like weirdness going on with this house. She has the ability to see these ghouls, but they kind of leave her alone. So that's totally fine. She's like, whatever, they're fine. They're not bothering me. Her cousin is there. He wants her to leave. There are two servants in the house that are taking care of her, and they're like, you should leave, but like, we're gonna try to help you stay. Like, we think, we feel bad for you. But basically, the plot for this book isn't really introduced until the end, sort of. There's this metal door gateway in the garden that leads somewhere, kind of leads to this realm of otherness. I don't know. There isn't really a whole lot that I can say without giving away the book. I would say, it's like mostly enjoyable, but just not my favorite. Overall, I did give it 3.5 stars. I just wish that plot had been introduced earlier and it wasn't so, all right, what's going on here? We're learning, but we're not getting anywhere, if you know what I mean. All that to say, it was a pretty easy read, so 3.5 stars. That's my thoughts on that. Another book that I read, I had actually started it at the beginning of May and then didn't finish it until almost the end of May, May 24th. I had picked it up from my library, but it was Diary of a Left-Handed Birdwatcher. So I thought that this would be a really interesting book about this man's trials to try and find a snow bunting in his birding experiences. So it is a nonfiction book, sort of a memoir. Overall, this book was very boring. I found this author's view of birdwatching to be very pretentious. I didn't relate to a lot of the things that he was saying, just simply because he believes that his personal view of birdwatching is superior than other people's way of birding. Like, he doesn't think that birding should be about keeping lists or always trying to seek the next thing. Like, he's constantly seeking epiphany. He wants to have this extremely emotional reaction to birds when he sees them, and he gets disappointed when he doesn't. So, for example, he knew a particular rare bird was in the area and he was going to go see it, but in the day leading up to it, he spent a lot of time doing research on the bird so that when the time came to go out into the world to see the bird, it came out right away. He spotted it very quickly and then was honestly disappointed. He was like, there was no sense of wonder while looking at this bird because he already had learned so much of it the day before, which is, I don't know, he was mad that he got to see this new bird. I don't know. It was genuinely like, if I don't have epiphany moment, he kept saying epiphany, then it's just not worth it. It was just, I don't know. I didn't really like it. There were some moments within it that, were kind of these universal bird watching moments that I really liked and really related to. But in general, there were multiple times I just wanted to put the book down, but because I'm so stubborn, I finished it. It was only 130 pages. How was I going to DNF a 130-page book? So ultimately, I gave it a 2-star rating. That's simply because in my rating system, a 2-star rating is I finished it, I didn't like it, but I finished it. Along the same lines of books about birding, I was able to get an arc of this book. This book is called Pocket Nature Birdwatching. So this was a really great, also about 130-page book, but it was really informational. This is a great book if you are interested in starting out bird watching, you want to learn a little bit about birds, or maybe you currently are a bird watcher and still want to learn about birds. It was broken down into tons of really easy to understand chapters, and there were sections of the book that talk about how birds work and how to identify different types of birds and how to create a bird-friendly yard and the tools and things that you need to go bird watching and best practices for being out into the field and backyard birding and feeder info. And it was just a really overall fantastic book. And I thought it was very informative. Myself as a bird watcher, I would love to receive a book like this as a gift or even to give it to anyone that I know who has expressed interest in birds. So this book will be coming out in August. I thought it was a really fantastic informational book that was very clearly well researched, and I gave it 5 stars for that. I also had the privilege to read another arc for The Lavender Blade. So the premise for this book was really interesting. I got it from NetGalley. Basically, it's this steampunk world, and we have our two main characters, Colton and Lucian. It's told through Colton's third-person point of view. Colton is an exorcist, and I say exorcist because demons aren't real in this world. People believe them to be. He has been raised to be an exorcist, but he's never actually seen or discovered real exorcists, but people still believe it's real. All of the scenarios in which he's been called to exorcise have just been very bizarre scenarios, like a pig, a little pig who's stealing scraps of food and people are convinced that a ghost is in their house robbing them, or a man who has schizophrenia who's been attacking people inside of a factory, or a woman who, killed her daughter's boyfriend that she was having an affair with. Just all these things, it's very like X-Files. People think that these supernatural things are happening, but it's actually very human based. But Colton has created this facade into tricking people that he is actually exorcising these demons to get money. And he's been doing a really good job of conning. So he comes across this guy named Lucian who's very rich and very powerful and has a lot of influence. And Lucian's like, hey, we should be business partners. We can con all of the rich people of this town and make bank while doing it. So Colton's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. So all the makings of a potentially very interesting book. The plot summary describes that Lucian gets actually possessed by a demon. Now, I DNF'd this book at 37%, and that still hadn't happened yet. We were very much dragging through unnecessary and unimportant things. I genuinely don't know at what point Lucian gets possessed. It could have been the next page. I don't know, but I gave up on it. A lot of the dialogue that was in this book was so cringe. For example, it was described that Colton put out his arms like a dinosaur and said rawr, R-A-W-R, or this place smells like a butt. And it was just, I don't know, it was very juvenile. There were also several inconsistencies throughout the book. Like I said, it's written in third person from Colton. So it's very, Colton said this and Lucian said that and Colton said this. But then sometimes there were first person in which we're saying I said this or I thought this, which was confusing. I didn't really love that. I did enjoy the chemistry between the two characters. One of them was very flirty and the other person's very self-conscious and doesn't really think that they're genuinely interested in him. I don't know. It was just hard. I wanted to like it. I wanted to continue it, but literally just the thought of picking it up and continuing it, I would have rather have done anything else, but I feel like I gave it a real college try. Like I said, I DNF'd at 37%, which I think was 180 pages into it. I genuinely tried. So unfortunately, that ended up being a 1-star for me. 1 stars are books that I DNF'd. Finally, the last book that I read in May from the prompt jar was a title with more than 5 words. So for that, I had selected The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I also did this one on audiobook. And you know what? There wasn't much slaying vampires. The only slaying happened at 93% into the book because no one really accepted the fact that the character that is a vampire until the end, because this is the real world. This is normal. Why would there be vampires in this world? So I would technically consider the title to be a little misleading. Overall, this book just kind of ended up being like a thriller, which is not the kind of books that I like to read. I thought this was going to be more fantasy, but it was very much thriller. It left me very unsettled at multiple points. I wanted to stop the audiobook so many times while driving because I was so disturbed by some of the things that were happening. Our main character is Patricia. She is a housewife in the early 90s, and part of that is incredibly frustrating because of the way that the men are in this time period around their wives. So it's all about like a bunch of housewives, and they're basically treated as just that. Oh, you're just women. You're just housewives. You're not intelligent in any way because you're just a housewife, which is so frustrating. So it's anytime they were like, hey, there's this suspicious thing going on with this character, they're like, you're crazy. You're just a woman. He's a trustworthy guy. And it's like, no, please listen to me. There's also a lot of racism going on in this book that's equally frustrating to read about. And it was just white knuckle grasping my steering wheel while listening to this audiobook with how frustrated I was with how poorly so many of the characters in this book were treated. I really wanted to turn it off. So overall, I did give this book 4 stars just because it did keep me engaged, because I wanted to know what was going on. Not to say that I enjoyed the book. I very much hate listened to it because it was so frustrating, but it was a good story. The author did a good job of making me feel unsettled and making me frustrated about the characters. So that's that. Would I recommend this to anyone? No. Like I said, I hate read this book. But I guess objectively it was good. I just don't do this kind of genre. So those were the 10-ish books, if we include the DNF, that I read in the month of May. I've got a full stack of books ready to go for June that I'm super excited about. I am trying to read down my entire physical TBR, and I just bought 7 books this weekend. So got a little bit more work ahead of me. I'm now net -4 based on the progress that I've made, but I will keep y'all updated on, all the books that I read. So definitely make sure to check back, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.